Good morning, Nystrom, and happy Wednesday to you. I hope you continue to have a great week of distance learning. Now, as you know, February is Black History Month, and so we've been trying to highlight and learn about different African Americans throughout our country's history who have had an impact. And so today I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite sports, or really truthfully, my favorite sport, which is baseball. So it's entirely possible, and maybe even likely, that you have heard of Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was the first black person to play in the major leagues, but that does not mean he was the first African American to excel on the baseball field. See, well before Jackie Robinson played in the major leagues, there were the Negro Leagues, which was a league made up of almost entirely black players. So let's learn a little bit about the history of the Negro Leagues right now.
Welcome to the Museum of Artifacts That Made America, and an all-star object from the Sporting Archives. This is the story of how African American baseball players overcame racial segregation to claim the national pastime as their own. Batter up, play ball. At Illinois' Comiskey Park in 1937, 50,000 fans gathered for the East-West All-Star Game. Buck Leonard, all-star first baseman with the Homestead Grays, stepped up to the plate and knocked the ball out of the park to secure victory for the East. It was the culmination of another year in the Negro League, a confederation of semi-professional teams made up almost entirely of African American players excluded from the major and minor leagues. To be honest, in an era of widespread racial segregation across America, sport was not free of prejudice. Since the late 1800s, in fact, white players and club owners had agreed to divide baseball along the color line. Yet black players had a lot to offer the game, and in 1920, celebrated pitcher Ruby Foster founded the Negro National League, giving African American players a chance to earn a living playing the sport they love. Over the next few decades, teams like the Kansas City Monarchs, Baltimore Black Sox, and Buck Leonard's Homestead Grays became household names, drawing huge crowds for their end-of-season East-West All-Star Game. And Negro League innovations, like the first ever night game, became popular across all leagues, changing baseball forever. The success of the Negro Leagues couldn't be ignored, and in 1946, the color line was finally broken when the Brooklyn Dodgers signed Jackie Robinson to the Major League. By 1959, every Major League Baseball team had a black player on its roster, but 60 years later, in 2019, the LA Dodgers didn't field a single black player. Does that mean we're going backwards? Today, the 1937 East-West All-Star Game Ball is stored for safekeeping in the National Museum of American History, a symbol of sporting excellence and one of the artifacts that made America.
There are so many great players that played in the Negro Leagues that never got the same recognition or the recognition they deserved as white players, simply because they played in the Negro Leagues. And the Negro Leagues were considered not as good, which is simply not true. And while we can never make up for that, Major League Baseball did make some news more recently by now including the records of those players in the Negro Leagues in baseball's history. Taken a long time for that to happen, but nonetheless a step in the right direction. Now, if we zoom forward a little bit, as the video talks about, Jackie Robinson was the first player to play in the major leagues who was black. Let's take a moment and learn a little bit about Jackie Robinson.
April 15th, 1947, when Jackie Robinson walked onto the field for the Brooklyn Dodgers, he broke Major League Baseball's color line, forever changing the sport and race relations in America. Jackie Robinson was an extraordinary athlete, lettering in 4 varsity sports at UCLA. During World War II, he was drafted into the Army. He was court-martialed after refusing to move to the back of a segregated military bus. Robinson fought his case. He was acquitted, then honorably discharged.
So he always had a sense of fairness, always had a sense of racial justice and social justice.
In 1945, because the major leagues remained segregated, Robinson joined the Negro Leagues and played for the Kansas City Monarchs. Meanwhile, sports writers from African American newspapers were pressuring the major leagues to integrate. Branch Rickey, general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, decided he'd act and began a search for the perfect prospect. Robinson's college education, and his ability to endure the racist attacks that inevitably would ensue convinced Rickey that it was Robinson who was the ideal candidate to become the first African-American major league player. Rickey signed Robinson to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. Despite racist abuse from opposing teams and taunting by the crowds, Robinson managed to focus on the game. But the cost was high. He suffered indignities because of a commitment not to fight back. Gradually, he built a fan base, excelled on the field, and then was named Rookie of the Year. Even naysayers couldn't deny his outstanding talent as he led the Brooklyn Dodgers to their first and only World Series championship. When he retired, Robinson turned his attention to the civil rights movement.
He's a frontline participant, lending his prestige and his presence to these causes for civil rights.
He supported protests in Alabama, attended the March on Washington, and was one of the NAACP's biggest fundraisers. Yet Robinson saw civil rights as more than a political movement.
He engages in business and entrepreneurial activities. It speaks to his multifaceted approach: do away with Jim Crow, but create opportunities for African Americans.
By breaking the color line in America's favorite pastime, Jackie Robinson opened the door for integration far beyond the baseball field.
All right, Tuesday's riddle. You see me in water, but I never get wet. What am I? The answer is a reflection, and so many of you nailed this. Miss Sims' class, Miss B, Miss Ibirola, Mr. Z, Miss Heller, Miss Robinson, Miss Barber, Miss Schultz, Miss Fairweather, Miss Franco, Miss Mossa, Miss Lydia, and Miss Etchie. Awesome job on Tuesday's riddle. Let's see how you do on this one. What animal gives the best hugs? And here's my hint. What do you need to give a good hug? Think that one over and let me know. We'll share the answer on Thursday morning. That is it for today. Remember those 4 B's. Be responsible, be respectful, be safe, and be honest. Have a great day or not. The choice is yours.